Hi, I'm Will Harris from the Autodesk Venice Beach, California office, and I'm excited to take you through an in-depth look at what we call Workflow Redefined in Autodesk Flame Premium 2013 Flame 20th Anniversary Edition. So we're going to boot into the VFX and editing, which are now combined in the Flame Premium. I've got two cool projects to show you, one from Alt VFX in Brisbane, Australia, the other from Entropic in Los Angeles, California. Now, when we boot up here into the desktop, things will look somewhat familiar, but you're going to notice some changes as we go along. Here's the full screen player where I'm going to actually just play back this master for you from Alt VFX. So a really cool piece, and I really think that a great way to understand the amount of work that goes into a piece like this is to take a look at a sort of before and after. And what we have here, as you can see, is a bit more of an understanding of how virtual or CG replacement deer are used, stags and does. And of course you're probably thinking now about the amount of motion capture as well as character animation, texturing, hair systems that would go into this. Even the stuff that is live action tends to need work, like trainer removal. Sometimes it's a complete replacement, complete CG replacement, a photoreal integration in this spot, which is really cool. In this example, you actually have a live action doe interacting with a CG stag, and indeed, it's not possible to work with stags. They're not very friendly actors. Just a cool bunch of stuff there from the guys at Alt VFX. Notice how I'm using a swipe right here to navigate to different parts of the software. I'm just going back to the desktop reels while you're getting used to that hotkey, the tilde key. As I said, I'm using the full screen player that I'm just reviewing my clips with here. You can see how I actually have my reel at the bottom. Or I have a normal player view that's now integrated with the desktop. So you may have already noticed the tabbed interface at the bottom of the UI. This different rooms or pages based on task. We have the Media Hub, which is our Media I/O utility area, where we can see all the formats, including the new Sony MXF F65 format. We have Conform, and that is the visual file-based conforming tool. The timeline is now integrated into the desktop, so you're able to interact those. We have a thumbnail view, which is a bit like a source area view to review our clips. And we have our integrated player, essentially with the timeline at once. Batch is now its a complete environment, and that means that I can work procedurally without having to sort of step into a batch. It's live all the time. And then back to the tools. Now, in order to manage these different areas, we have the Workspace Media panel, and I can just control swipe left to see that. And there are the different pieces. We have a batch category and a desktop category. These areas live live or in RAM if you like. It's our work in progress desk and batch. And you can see the different pieces of our reels represented virtually here. Then below that you have the kind of disk-based or deep-saved, everything that's not on your desk or in your batch right now. So this could be a whole bunch of experiments, a bunch of clips, that are now represented as one big tree as opposed to individual libraries. We can organize in there if we want, add a folder, just keep doing what you would do in any kind of managing tool of files and folders. You can also see a preview of your clips just by clicking them here. So you can get a full screen player view here if you like of any of those clips. If I alt-click over them, you can also see their metadata. So these areas can interact dynamically. I can take stuff from the media library, drop it right onto the desk, and just see those clips. And as I add reels, you can see how I'm going to start filling up my desk with more stuff, but if I want to, I could drag an entire clip right onto the desk gesturally and into this desktop area, and what it'll do is it'll keep the name of my folders, and I'm now still working with the contents of shot 48 there. The thing that we're building to here is that the desktop is becoming virtual. That means that if I see more than 8, if I want more than 8 on my desk, whilst I can't see more than 8 at one time, I can then remove ones that I don't need right now and start to see those other reels. So you could have potentially 50 or 100 or sort of unlimited reels on one desk. Think of that as one thought, if you like. But you can then just kind of pare down what you're looking at, throw stuff away, but always be able to kind of keep one big massive desk with up to any 8 reels visible at one time. So if this all seems like a lot, I wanted to just reassure you that the modules-based a la carte workflow here in the Flame is still very much present and very much important. Your old friends such as Paint and other tools like that here are right available to us in the same way that we would work before. This is one of the big powers of the desktop, to be able to to do stuff quickly and easily. And then of course you can start looking through the different categories for different tools. They're now reorganized. So if you're looking for something that's a filtering process, an image adjustment process like the Warper, here it is. And here's just a little example where you might still be using custom warp splines if you wanted to, just a great power tool of the system. And indeed, I'm going to just show you how you can interact now more powerfully with module-based effects and the timeline. And that's really what we're going to do next. So that could be fun if we wanted just a funky looking effect here on this this shot. So then that's easy and still works the way it ever did. Let's then jump into actually doing some editing. I'll add another reel here, and then we'll just throw together gesturally shots. This is something that I know Flame guys love to do, and be able to kind of throw clips together. What you've really done in effect is made a timeline, right? So you can scan through it, you can see the edit points. We use our expanded view here. That C hotkey for collapsing now has a third storyboard view, which can really make you think about it like a timeline. I like to put my timeline at the bottom and sort of drag more sources in. What's really cool is that gestural operations like swap shot are now even faster with just this simple gestural drag and drop to replace a shot in a timeline. If we think about this a bit more explicitly as a timeline, you can see by switching to the timeline tab, what I'm able to do is now start trimming as an editor would, kind of thing, working with that timeline more intuitively. I can add, splice in, insert shots here if I want. That's easy to do with this drag and drop interface. I can even bring a clip down and add a layer automatically here. So that will just essentially give me a 2-layer timeline. You can see that my overhead shot there is now dropped in on layer 2. And if we just scrub through this and maybe play through it real quick, you'll be able to see how this is nice and integrated now, the timeline, the player, but yet we still haven't really left the desktop. We still have our Reels view there if we like. So then, if you want to bring in your paint fix here, drag, drop, replace, even on a second layer, that's great. Or indeed, if you wanted to bring in this guy here, do the same thing, and it's going to drop in on the layer below. And I'm in a much more flexible situation where I can start to do effects and dissolves and that kind of stuff that you might do at the very beginning or the end of a job. We just quickly have a look at that. You can just get the idea that as I play through, things are making sense. Just a quick rough timeline there. So that's the new dynamic relationship between the desktop and the timeline. What we'll look at next is going into that third creative space of the flame, the batch environment. So we're going to access it this time from the timeline, just sort of following our nose here. We could add axis effects, color corrections here, or we could create a batch effects, and that would take us into our procedural environment, but from the context of our clip. So this is a cool way to be able to see how the different environments, the different creative areas of the flame are now much more tightly integrated. It's a nice clean pathway now. In this redefined workflow, as we call it, I just added like a stylize there to give you the idea of a quick effect dropped on that would be done as part of as a compositing or a deeper effects tool set. And I just want to show you how we've kind of looped the loop of the different environments of our tool set, from desktop to timeline and through to batch effects, or batch back to the timeline, but still really controlling everything from the desk, which is a way a lot of people like to work. So let's pull up some shot elements. Notice how I just loaded a reel that I want to now work with, still working on the same desktop. But what I wanted to do now is talk about the pure shot-based batch environment, which is represented here in our workspace media panel. And if I just pick a bunch of shots that I want to bring in, what I can do is I can drag even across reel boundaries there and drop, really just throwing them over the fence into the batch environment. Like I said, this batch is live all the time. It's kind of cool to be able to just throw whatever sources you're thinking of into that batch sources area, and now they're available to us in batch. It's really nice, sort of creative and free way of working. If I start connecting my nodes and I realize, like I sometimes do, that I've got the wrong element, that I don't really want to work with the body of the animal rather than the horns in this little example shot, what I can do is I can look back onto the reels and do the reverse and drag it the other way, or I can look anywhere in my library here and go right down, drag and drop, and replace gesturally, straight in. So this is really clean, really easy. I don't have to leave my batch environment, and in a second I'm back into the creative mind and working on the shot. So hopefully you can just see how things are re-architected here to allow you to move faster in the software. And the walls are really kind of coming down between the different parts, such as libraries, such as desktops. I can now kind of get on with the business of compositing. I like to use the pixel spread tool here. This is just a great new way of doing kind of an image relevant key blend, and that's really kind of a cool way of blending out your key with different tonal values of different areas in the shot. So this is, you guys are familiar with this stuff. This is really about workflow. I wanted to show you now how, as you build your comp up, what you might run into next is an interesting kind of problem that I bet you've run into when you start compositing. Here we're working in our procedural environment of batch. I'm just going to do another key there. These tools are great at working the problem of the image, if you like, at the A over B over C, and of course, the world space compositing in action. But what it's not really that great at is dealing with sequencing problems or editorial problems, and that's exactly what we have in this shot. So if I just line my horns up to my guy here, what I'll do is I'll be able to just show you the problem, which is that they don't synchronize in terms of the movement or the action. They don't match. The horns don't turn to the right. They don't stop. They kind of float about all over the place. In fact, there's this is like a 1,000 frame long take of horns being moved on an actor's head, and we have an editorial problem in a procedural world. This is another great link in the software where we're able to double-click this clip and see it directly on the timeline. This is the same timeline we've been working with earlier. It's not a special one that's inside a batch, but notice how the asset itself is managed by batch. That's shown in this bracketed batch here on the green tab, and it really means that whatever we do here will synchronize right back into that source, and however we leave it, it will be left that way in batch. So this is a really cool reverse relationship between batch and the timeline, and I can now solve this problem as I naturally would if I was thinking of it as an editorial problem. So what I could do here is I could drop in the other layer as a reference, really, just so that we can see the length and get an idea of that movement. I can use a soft effect, just temporarily, like a blend, to be able to see the problem in a little more detail. So I can see that I don't have the right piece of action right now. Maybe there isn't the right piece of action in this take at all. It might be the only thing I have to work with. So what I might do is pick a section that might work, for at least for a start. We'll trim the head off of there, and what I'll do is I'll just see how it's going to look. So you can see how that is working a little better now. At least he turns in about the right space, and hopefully as I do this you can start to understand what I mean by we've got an editorial problem. It's not just simply a matter of timing or slipping or trimming, because even when I get it lined up here, you can see that it overshoots. So what I would do is I would need to do something about the back half here. So at this point here I'm going to add another edit. That's the delete key on the keyboard, by the way, and I'm able to come in here and just trim it off to length. Go ahead and add a time warp. That's the intuitive thing to do, is to set it to 0 or maybe 10% to slow down. And what I can get then is kind of just a hold that will hopefully be enough for us to be able to work with this element. And you can just see how that's kind of hopefully solving my problem for me. And now without any kind of media management, clip management, I just return to batch. That source has now been updated. I mean, it was managed by batch, so it has never left batch. And now I'm in a much better place where if I just resync my element based on the the resequencing change that I made, you can see that you can get much closer to the action that we're going to need here. Of course, it would be dialed in and tracked in. And let's just jump ahead to have a look at an example of that. But hopefully you can just get an idea of how the workflow is made easier, and hopefully your work is made faster and more creative as you use this new version of the software. In this case, we just did like a shape track to lock in the horns, a little color correction. And the G-mask tool is a nice tool to use to just blend layers together. Right in the action environment here, you're able to just have an action G-mask, which could allow you to do that sort of last bit of blending, adjusting, softening, to really see the two elements properly integrated. So now let's talk about the interoperability with 3D animation software. You might remember I was talking about a shot where there was a 3D or animated stag interacting with a live doe. This is it right here. And of course, there's a lot of work that goes into doing a lot of shots at this kind of quality. One of the methods that we're going to look at is working with motion capture. Notice I just added a reel there to my desk just to refocus on a different part of my what I want to work on here. And here in the full screen player again, you might remember that there's these stags, dozens of them in some shots, need to be fully integrated photorealistically, and in there there's a bunch of shots. So where does this start? Well, often it starts with a basic control rig and some motion capture. The guys at Alt did some capture with horses and found it was just not quite right, and they needed to actually use a real deer to get the movement looking just right. Of course, this gets worked on and applied and nuanced for the given shots, but some really cool technology used there. Back into the shot, what we'll do is we'll just give you a couple of snapshots into how this stuff was done, starting with an FBX. You could work with an Alembic cached format here if you wanted, or I'm going to use an animated mesh FBX, which will give us texture with movement and camera and lights if I want. This is the schematic. This is all of the pieces of an FBX coming in. You can actually bring in millions, 4 million polygons these days into action and still get scrubbability. What I have here, then you can see my stag is now just dropped in real quick. The advantage to being able to do this and have this kind of quality, of course, is that you can make decisions, critical decisions, on how things are going to look, sitting down with your client on, let's say, the eye lines between these two characters, without having to do a long render from your animation tool set. You could come in here and just play around with it if you wanted, get something working or something visualized that you can work with. You can just see the ease with which I can work with this complete animated model. I can even use my hover anti-aliasing to dial in a super clean look there if I want. Alright, so the next thing you might do is work with EXR. Let's just bring in an actual multi-channel EXR here. It's worth asking your 3D artist to output, if you don't already, different render passes or non-image data such as normals, motion vectors, UVs, and this world position pass, which is a really cool one that we're going to show you right now. So this multi-channel source here comes in, and what we're able to do is pick the pieces that we want. It's really cool to be able to load as version, as we call it, where you could bring in a second EXR or another version and update that, keeping the links moving. What we have here is an actual scene where I'm using the world position and normals to displace the pixels of the flat render into space. Let me show you what I mean by that. If I actually just orbit around here, so you can see that we've got what we think of as the envelope, or the piece of the pixels that we need in the place, kind of like working with geometry, but position map is a very special kind of displacement. It takes that flat render and it displaces it in front of the camera, so as that from the point of view of the camera, combined with normals to get the nuanced smoothing of the surface, we have our result, which is essentially the best of both worlds. It's a render with all that high detail in it, but it has the ability to be lit and to be worked with and composited with in a much more comprehensive way than a flat render. So I can even come and take my lights here, put them where I want, dial in some little kicker lighting here for my stag, and maybe even dial in the color of the specific light that I want, those kind of things. Even later into the process here, as we'd be working with with close to final renders here, we would then be dialing in things like fill lighting and dialing in the look. Cool. So if you've done integration work like this with CG renders and live action backplates, you've probably run into some possible differences in color space, perhaps working with Scene Linear and Rec. 709 combined. And I want to talk to you about our implementation of ACES, which is a color framework for managing a lot of different color spaces into one working format. And here's the problem. If you have things like ARRI log C mixed with Rec. 709, mixed with sRGB or a digital camera still, they each have different black levels, different contrast ratios, different gamma curves. And if you look at the CG linear render here, it looks completely wrong until you actually tell it the source. In this case, we tell it it's linear, and that will bring it back into the ballpark of how it should, it's supposed to look. But when you start mixing more than one or two pieces, like we have here in this column, 5 or 6 pieces coming together from different color spaces, you could end up with a bit of a dog's breakfast. That's a bit of a mishmash of different contrast ratios that you can't quite view correctly. One could be super dark, one is a bit milky, you can see there. And that's really a symptom of these mismatched color spaces. So what is ACES? Well, the Academy Color Encoding Specification sits in the middle of a bunch of input and output color transforms, or LUTs. And really it's a working color space. It's a wide color gamut, high dynamic range color space. And the way it works is you bring in your inputs, input sources, and put them through a transform or a LUT to convert them into ACES. And that process is different for different sources. So if you had ARRI raw material here, you would put it through a log C to ACES transform. If you have, for example, a CGI image here, or an OpenEXR rendered in scene linear, you're already in a linear high dynamic range color space. So what you do is you would just translate the primaries, convert the primaries from typically a Rec. 709 into ACES primaries. That's those wide color gamut primaries. And then on the way out, it's really your output device, your monitor, that you care about. You would use a viewing LUT or a output device color transform in ACES speak to be able to see the images correctly on your monitor. So it wouldn't change shot by shot, it would just be your workstation's setup. It's really a very flexible architecture that allows for all kinds of different inputs, has a very high quality, high bit depth working format, and it has a full set of output transforms for HD Rec. 709, D-Cinema P3 or XYZ color space, or even log for a film out. So here's a similar comp with ACES applied, or working in ACES if you like. Let's just take a look at this digital camera still. Here's the source or the front, and we're using our LUT editor if you like, our RGB LUT on this clip to do an inline input transform. And what that does is it's a two-step process to have the sRGB gamma removed, and then the primaries need to be converted into ACES, and then on the way out we're going to use our viewing LUT. So I'm just going to go ahead and load a viewing LUT for this workstation. It's a monitor LUT, right? It's not going to go in line, it's going to just be visible so that we're seeing our image correctly. So then just using our HD calibrated monitor here, we're able to load an appropriate LUT for HD Rec. 709. You would pick the one for your workstation, and what I then have when I look at my ACES to HD is a sort of a normalized image going through the whole pipeline, through the whole process into ACES and then back out from my monitor. Each source would need to have its own input LUT. So here's our Alexa material, which would have a different LUT, depend on the flavor that we choose here. In fact, if we were to open up some Sony F65 material, I'll go right to my Media Hub here and grab a clip. This format, and all these new formats are certainly a good reason to be able to have a color management framework. By the way, this one actually can be interpreted as scene linear Rec. 709 or go straight into ACES as one of its import options. This is that Sony F65 format, and if we load this directly to batch, this is really neat. I could put it anywhere I like actually, but to be able to drag it straight into batch makes it real easy to start working with without having to break my sort of creative train of thought. That clip there also viewed via the ACES to HD output LUT. So now hopefully you can understand how this helps you sort of linearize and neutralize your clips, and then they can then be composited together in a bit more in the ballpark. So the contrast ratios are similar now. I, of course, do some creative adjustments for the comp, but that part you guys know, that's the easy part for you. This color management stuff is something that is great to have a framework in place for to manage. So thanks again to the guys from Alt VFX, Colin Renshaw, the lead artist there, and the entire team at Alt. So let's look at something completely different. We have a short turnaround job here that gets completed in post-production in 48 hours. It's a music video spot for Ford in the American Idol broadcast TV show. It's done by the guys at Entropic in LA, and what they do is, the nature of this work, you can imagine, is it has to be done quickly as the contestants are eliminated. There's a shoot on a Sunday, which actually leads into post-production on a Monday morning, and the first step would be to do a conform of your edit. I'm going to show you now the new file-based conform toolset. So one of the challenges on a job like this could be that you don't know who's going to be in the shoot. Nature of this show is it's an elimination show, so you might get your receptionist or whoever you can find to do a test shoot to be able to just try out the look, the feel of these comps, prepare a bunch of elements, stock elements, and so on. But that might be all that can be done in the post facility until the edit's ready, and it might very quickly be upon you with a reference, and in this case an XML and a bunch of drives, a bunch of footage that all need to be conformed. In this reference you can see that as well as being these temp keys, there's also movement of the green screen elements. That's all inherent in the edit, if you like, in the XML. We're going to use that to our advantage. While we're talking about loading footage, just want to show you how it's really cool the way that any of this compressed media can now be loaded via the Media Hub with or without what we call Create Project Media. And you can just drag a whole folder, a whole bunch of them in. And notice how the folder structure gets rebuilt here. And that's just neat for communicating with someone else working on the same material on the job tree, if you like, on the shots, on a server. So let's jump back into the conform process. First thing to do is to go get the metadata, in this case an XML. And I'm going to use this, I'm going to just set a couple of options on our XML here to just interpret the way it's going to come in. Check some default ways of searching, but we'll start right at the beginning with a raw timeline. Notice how this entirely redesigned tool is now a very visual way of working with this spreadsheet type view and the timeline view dynamically linked, so that you can select an event in your timeline and see it up here with all its metadata in the list view, if you like. This is a much nicer way to work. The first thing you would do would be to set a scan directory, if you like, or a location where you know your sources are. And the nature of this kind of work is that you could have multiple drives, multiple servers, all of which are really, if you think about it, just different folders that we can now access. So this is how it works. We're able to point to a folder, do a scan of the subdirectories below that point, and then match in, based on our criteria, at least a chunk of the footage. So far, so good. Most of the time, you can get some of the conform to work, but we want to show you how we can start dealing with those trouble shots along the way. The XML, by the way, is useful. You can start to see how the repositioned clips and so on over in my preview window here are coming over. Might well be able to take advantage of that, especially in this fast turnaround workflow. Let's hide the linked shots and let's focus in on what's left and jump to a new search directory. So any other folder, different drive, different server, whatever it is, scan that one out. And what we'll be able to see now is a few more links. We might change our match criteria to ignore things like a frame rate check or the file name perhaps, and purely focus just on source time code. That might make it a little easier. We could even turn off our strict matching, which allows for partial name matches on the clips. So just a lot of flexibility here. Let's link what we got and then start zeroing in on some of the troubled shots. Could be QuickTime movies, could be JPEGs, and we might just use the whole server, the whole job server, where we think there must be, those stills must be in there, and just scan that subfolders out. What this does now is this gives me multiple matches because the metadata is getting a little thin on the ground. We need to be able to start matching based on partial names only. We don't really have maybe any useful source time code. And this little pool of clips down the bottom, these 4 candidates, are the 4 possible matches. So I can just thumb through them here, pick through them, preview them, and decide, okay, I think in this case I want to match this shot. All I do is just right-click and choose to link it, tell it which one I think I want to match, so then I might pick a whole different one this time with no real matching metadata and just jam it in there, force link it in. What that does is that gets us to a place where we can work the trouble shots, and really just, if you have the element in your hand and you think, I just want to force that into there, you can. And indeed, it'll probably come to this, especially these quick turnaround jobs where perhaps the metadata hasn't been tracked as closely as it should have been. You know what I mean, and hopefully you can see how this is a much more developed way of working, specifically with these file-based conforms, very much tailored for that. A little bit further along, you can see how our sort of timeline is now ready to be worked with for effects work and grading. So let's take a look at that. If you wanted to grade these shots, you can see how it's useful to be able to mute the effects temporarily. And what we do is we do a workflow called source grading with our grading component of Flame Premium to allow us to do exactly that. So this process may not be linear. You may do some work in grading, some in visual effects. It might be on one workstation, it could be on multiple workstations. It's a highly iterative, round type process that we're going to look at. We'll take a look at grading first, then visual effects. So here in Flame Premium Grading, I'm going to show you how we have a custom built color grading tool here. But also the timeline that we just worked with is still here intact, and you can see the multiple layers. You can see how as I jump through, things look somewhat the same, but then when we arrive at the stack here at the end, an obvious place to just take a look here, you can see the soft effects markers are on the shots, but each individual plate is now full screen, so we can color grade it, and those soft effects are going to get reassociated with this timeline back in the Flame visual effects environment in just a minute. But the reason to have this here in the Flame Premium suite is for speed and agility for color grading. So what we have here is 48 layers of color grading secondaries and shapes. It's kind of like having color warpers and G-masks all chained together. It's really ergonomic and easy to use. And we're going to jump right in here to adjust this day for night look just with a primary grade right now. So just by getting that look started at a base layer, you can see how you might go and do a little more manicuring. I'll pull a key here. Let me just do a luma key on those highlights, which can often be one of the tells of daytime. It's supposed to be night. We need to bring that down a bit. So just by pulling the key, just like compositing, I'm using this as an overlay key, if you like, to adjust color, bring down those highlights, just to try and get it a little bit more looking like real nighttime, and deepen down the look of this shot. Once I have something that I like, what I might do now is to copy it down the timeline. Being that I can only see 5 or 6 shots here, I can use my storyboard view to view a grid or a whole bunch more shots, and just drag and drop that grade onto these shots to see how we're doing. Now it may not fit every shot. We can go through and make tweaks and changes, but let's just focus in on it's a couple of shots here. You can see this one needs a bit of a change. We'll dial it in with a slightly different look, and so on. There's certainly a lot more that could be done to your individual shots. So for example, here on this shot, what we might do is work a little more on the sky, get it looking a little darker. So by just re-pulling the sky key here a little more accurately for this shot, we can pull ourselves a nice cleaned up key here. Want to get the sky, want to get a sort of a blended mid-tone here, and remove some of the car if I can. And we're then in a place where we can start bringing down that sky element a bit more accurately. Of course, as you do this kind of thing, sometimes you end up destroying detail in places that you don't want, like the actors' faces. But because we have a non-destructive color transform here, that means we have headroom and footroom in our buffer, we're able to bring back detail in the next layer down, or further layers if we want. So if I draw an extra shape here, what we'll do is we'll just carve out a free sort of free built shape here, and soften it out a little bit, and then bring in some color through this. Hopefully you can see that the shape system here is very much like the flame. What we're able to do is just pull that out, but we need to further isolate our look so as we get just the faces and not the sky. And here's how it looks. So you can see that this is nice and adjustable. we can get the look that we want pretty quickly, and sort of sculpt the light in the shot, which is really what grading is all about, quickly and easily. The last thing we might do is to actually track in the shape. We have a point tracker, but we also have a shape tracker here for that sort of organic movement to bring back that detail. And of course you can have multiple shapes on one layer if you want. So if we wanted to bring back the headlight as well with that same color grade, even though it's a different object that's going to move differently, what we can do is just track that as well. So then this just gives you an idea of the sort of detail work, the kind of sculpting of the image that you can do with a real-time color grading tool set. Let's move on to look at a little bit more efficiency tools. Handling a lot of shots quickly in color grading is always an important thing. And you see how that later down the timeline we have a bunch of a couple more nighttime shots and then the sky shots. So one great way to separate them out is to use a C mode or camera ascending timecode sort of our timeline. This is just a temporary reordering of the shots that allows us to then see them in an order that they were shot based on that ascending timecode. So I can easily now drag and drop that kind of master grade onto all of my ground-based shots here, and then I can focus on the green screen shots here as a unit. That's exactly what we'll do. We'll actually use group grading, which is a way of doing a kind of a gang or synchronized color grade on a bunch of shots that were shot in a similar location. So this could work well for this. What we'll do is we'll define that group and then just view them in a matrix or in a multi-view. We can see a 1 up or a 2 up here if we want, or up to all the way up to a 16-way split here to see all those shots compared right on screen, which is a nice way to do it. Because we're using that group technique, what you'll see is that I'll pick the shots and positions that I want, but because we're in that group mode, I'm now able to do a gang adjustment or a gang grade so that when I make changes, they're all getting that kind of adjustment in. If I've got 1 or 2 shots that don't kind of blend well, I can affect them individually and with a relative change. So what I'd do is I'd switch my group over to solo just for a second, working on this one shot, tweak it in to match the others at the current grade, maybe tweak this one as well. And then once I've synced them back to gang, and then any further relative adjustments that I make are synced into that look. This is, as you can see, a very powerful way of getting a lot of work done quickly. We'll just unsort our timeline, put it back the way it was, and you can just see how we can now start playing back through the timeline in its normal way, and we've got this active group here handling those shots, even though they're now sorted back, even stacked on top of each other potentially within the timeline. By doing this C mode sort, we've made sure we've caught everything, and we've found a fast way of getting stuff done quickly. So that was the grading, which could be happening at multiple stages in the job. Now we'll take a look at some of the visual effects in this piece. So here's the graded timeline back here in the Flame visual effects environment. I'm using the desktop and timeline together, where I can just see that my graded shots have now had their effects reapplied, and this is still editable, so I can change the position of these shots and work with them however I want here. This is cool. If I just take a look at a simpler shot here, you'll be able to see how these two mirrored axes effects may well be useful to take and use in the compositing environment. So we'll go ahead and take the axis and promote it into a composite with Create Batch Effects. What that does is that transitions us into our procedural environment, where I could use that as a starting point for compositing. So the moves are useful and could well be used along with some keys. So let's just take a look a little further along at how you might have a comp that looked a bit like this. So I want to just show you a couple of highlights here using some of our lighting tools like the blooming function to light these graphic elements in space. We'll use blooming here to just make it zing a little, get a little 3D glow going on that graphic element as well as on our background. And then this kind of mid-range sky here might not be quite what we want. I wanted to show you how I can browse down, just use that control swipe to access the workspace media panel, and I can go down and just browse anywhere on my project, perhaps my stock footage, to find just a different sky and pick one that I like, drag and drop to replace right in the action schematic. So now even though I'm working in action, which is inside a batch effects, which is inside a timeline, I'm still able to see all the way down into my libraries there, into my media library, and drag and drop a replacement clip. So exiting out of batch effects, if that's my kind of version 1, I could duplicate it above if I wanted, make a version 2, step right into that. This is one of the great things about batch effects in the timeline, is that I can instantly do versions. So if I want to just change, let's say, the sizing of this element here to make a bit of a change, adjust the graphic here, call that a version 2, that is easy to then compare, to A/B it, to jump between the two right on a timeline. It's a good mechanism for this kind of quick changes. Now, if I did want to take this shot and go deeper with it, go into the pure shot-based batch environment, that is now possible with a simple drag and drop. Take the clip from the timeline and just drag and drop it into the batch environment. This gives me the extra ability of the extra functions of shot-based batch. I'm no longer tied to a timeline. This clip is like an explicit cache, which means it's like a pre-comp or a clip that I can render or even burn if I want. This is great if you had a background build, but if you wanted to, you could also expand it out and really just get back to that setting that we built over on the batch effects side, and now work on it as a complete batch if we wanted. So let's do another version. You could be working in here for minutes or hours or days based on the shot. But if we make a change, let's just use a little bit of adjusting of our lighting here, our glow, and I thought I might nuance the shot with an additional G mask here, a favorite tool that gets us the ability to sort of cut a hole in the middle of action here just by drawing a shape. What I can do then is I can see a black hole kind of cutting all the elements, or I can make it selective. So I'll just do that, and you can see how I've now had it only affect our green screen element, and soften it in, something like that, to give us an idea of just another version update. So you might spend a lot more time building something like this. I just wanted to show you how you can do the reverse process and send this from being a live batch into a batch effects clip right here in the batch environment. Might relabel that as my version 3, and now I can go and do the opposite. So you might do one or other or both of these processes in your work. By dragging and dropping, I can bring it from the batch into the desktop if I want. So that's now ready to be just sort of rendered out just like the other shots. Or what I could do is bring it as a live comp from the batch environment, where it's effectively a kind of a pre-comp, and drop it now as a clip into the timeline. So this is just a neat way of being able to see how you can transition between these different disciplines, these different areas of the software. So let's just use the desktop and the timeline together to just cut in some final shots. I have these insert overwrite buttons I can use if I'd like, or I can drag and drop straight into the timeline to snap those guys in. Keep dragging them if you like, or even use hotkeys to be able to just use the O for overwrite to drop in shots quickly and easily. This is just a nice mechanism as you get towards the end of a job, as you're kind of using the timeline as a repository for all those finished shots, and layering them up for that quick comparison. Hopefully you can just see that this is a nice way to work with that integrated desktop and timeline. So what if in the last 10 minutes of the job, working on a final timeline here, your client says to you, can you just do something to add a little bit of bling, something to those stars? Can you make the stars shine more? Can you do something to this shot? Well, here's a great way to do it. If you have the shots already assembled in a timeline here, you can just cut the gap or filler above the shot, and then you're able to apply the batch effects tool to that gap. Think of it like an adjustment layer. What you're able to do then is just come in here and get those creative juices flowing for a last minute fix, whether it's a particular tool that you like to use or just a kind of a defocus effect. What you might do here is just try and get something from nothing. I'm sure you're asked to do that a lot. To be able to get, in this case, just was thinking of like a blurred out kind of bokeh zinging on the highlights, and then we'll add a quick matte. We'll use the gradient tool actually. Don't even have time to draw a mask. What I'll do is I'll just use a radial gradient, and by setting that to be used and even setting a context point for my clip there, what I could do is I could then quickly be able to see a kind of a just around the edges type effect where I could get my stars taking effect, and something like this might be what we want. That could be that little bit of bling that we need. If I back out to the timeline here, you can see how easy it is to just go before and after in this setup. It's just an effect on top. Or if you wanted to see it across the whole timeline, across all the shots, that's pretty easy too. This is a neat way to be able to make those incremental changes without disturbing or having to re-render your big comps. It's using the batch effects on a gap, which is neat. So if we were going to just kick that out, let's just build that one shot, and I'll play you down this timeline so you can see the full effect here. Thanks again to the guys from Entropic for this really cool content. It's really a great example of using the different corners of the toolset, visual effects, grading, and the editing tools. So hopefully you really get the idea that the Flame and the Premium package really is a kind of powerhouse of set of tools here for visual effects grading and editing. If you need even more scalability, you can add Autodesk Flare software to increase compositing bandwidth, or indeed Autodesk Smoke is the way to increase your conform bandwidth, whether it's file-based conforms, tape-based work. There's definitely some scalability there. So, thanks a lot for listening to this presentation of Flame Premium 2013 20th Anniversary Edition.